Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Light Reading Podcast. My name is Phil Harvey, and I am an editor here at Light Reading.
I'm Kelsey Zeiser. I'm also an editor at Light Reading.
I'm Pablo Tomasi, principal analyst covering private networks and enterprise 5G at Omdia.
Pablo from Omdia, thank you so much for joining us again. You've been a repeat guest now 2 or 3 times, I think, something like that. How have you been?
All good. As you can see, compared to the previous times, now I'm back at the office, so a bit of a change in pace, definitely here in London, but I'm glad to be here with you guys to talk about private networks and what is happening in this market. Everyone seems to be really interested in private networks, so it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're definitely covering it a lot more from the point of view of, well, there's 2 sort of things. It doesn't sort of follow the path of a traditional telco market in that the competitive landscape is so varied at a point. And that's been one of the really interesting developments from my point of view, is that the usual players are going to be a major factor in the market, but they're not necessarily going to be the only ones, and they might not even be the dominant players in the space. Has the competitive landscape changed much since the last time we've talked? Because when the last time we talked, there were a lot of, I think it was right before Mobile World Congress, lots of market dynamics were sort of happening because there were tons of partnerships being announced, lots of proof of concepts, lots of partnerships with various kinds of companies. Has that activity ramped up anymore, or is it, or has the types of companies that are involved changed since the last time we talked?
I think there are a couple of very interesting points to discuss when it comes to the competitive landscape of private networks. First of all, something that I see on a daily basis is that you see companies that are entering the market and trying to find the right strategy to target private networks from all different backgrounds. Now, what's interesting to see in this market is that while a company enters perhaps with a new strategy, that will affect all the strategies that are currently used by existing players. And when I'm saying that everyone wants to be in private networks, we have offerings from telcos, network vendors, system integrators. Now you have IT and enterprise players, you have startups, and you also have industrial vendors that are increasingly looking to understand what's the role with private networks. Now, when I'm talking instead about different strategies emerging and potentially shaping the future of the market, recently, just before the MWC, we have seen Cisco and HP starting to target the market, looking at bridging the Wi-Fi versus private cellular conversation. So that is a significant development compared to the previous conversation that were very much centered around cellular versus Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you recently did a really great recap of Mobile World Congress and some of the major topics there, and you were talking about private networks, and I thought it was interesting. One of the points you made was that talking about some of these solutions doesn't equate to being an expert in it. So can you talk a little bit about how it does seem like a lot of vendors are ready to jump on private networks, but how do service providers and enterprises, how can they be alert to, just because the vendors involved, they might not be quite the expert that they're looking for?
This is a fascinating subject when it comes to private networks. I think the hype of the market, the potential that private 5G is bringing to the whole ecosystem is making vendor rushing up to enter this market. So every vendor wants to be part of private networks. Now, if you recall one of the previous discussion that we have, I've mentioned that this is a fragmented market. This is a different market, multiple verticals, different regions. And this means that there are lessons that you need to learn. Providing something for manufacturers is not the same as energy and is not the same as education, so on and so forth. So if you're rushing into this market, but you haven't done your homework, so to speak, well, you're going to have to do it eventually. So that will take a few years before you can say, yes, I'm actually up to speed. I'm becoming an expert in selling to this vertical rather than that vertical. And this is something that is not really happening yet. And instead, something that I still see in the market a few of the big announcements that have been made recently, they are effectively beta. They are sort of soft launches. So a company is providing private 5G, yes, but it's still a soft launch, which means that there is an understanding that is not that easy and straightforward to enter this market and to be successful. And I think this is something that not everyone has yet figured out. It's a market that takes time. It's a market that takes love and patience, if you want.
Yeah, the fragmentation, the market fragmentation is going to be, I think, continue to be the story. So I guess what we'll look for, a big sign that the market is maturing will be when both service providers and vendors maybe declare a specialty, and maybe they sort of pick a set of verticals and they say we're really just mostly focusing on these verticals, because that's when they've done their research. They know those markets well. They know the players and the competitive dynamics and the technical challenges. And and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but any company saying they can help everyone in private networks is maybe overreaching a bit at this point.
I would definitely say it's overreaching. Of course, there is a role that you can play across multiple deals, across multiple verticals. But if you want to gain a little bit more from private networks, or if you want to move a little bit up the stack of revenues that is available, you simply cannot do it for all the verticals, and you cannot do it on your own as well, right? You need an ecosystem of partners, and one of the issues that I currently see in the market is that but everyone is looking for partnerships. There is a race for logos. Like you just want to have 5, 10, 20 different companies that you say they are my partners. That's all fair and good. But I don't see a lot of companies thinking this to the next level. So of those partners that I currently have, how many of them will go after the same revenues that I want to go after? So effectively, are these short-term partnership or long-term partnerships? And that will be a big difference. I think the market will move from a quantitative type of partnership to a qualitative type of partnership. You need to ensure that your long-term view and the long-term view of your partners is well aligned. And at the moment, everyone is just, I want an ecosystem. I want as many partners as we can. And that could be a little bit of a challenge going forward.
Yeah, it's a bit of a land grab, like you said, land grab for logos, and it doesn't seem like, well, it does seem like that, or it's very possible that partners pursuing one industry vertical might turn around and compete with one another in a separate industry vertical, even though it's still in the same broad category of offering private networks, especially private 5G networks, since that seems to be the end goal is to provide 5G networks. Kelsey, do you have something, or do you want me to keep?
Yeah, another thing you kind of touched on in your presentation, and that we've related to a little bit here today already, is some unrealistic expectations about private 5G. Is that from all sides of the playing field, from vendors, service providers, and enterprises, or do you feel like there's one side that is setting more unrealistic expectations? How would you rate them? I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I would
Which
say
would
it's
you
a
like
little
to
bit.
upset, is what
Yeah,
she's saying.
well, sure.
Uh, that's a tricky one. I would
You could
say
just say everyone.
those who are more grounded to earth, I think, for their expectations, there's actually the enterprise, and this is because the whole conversation, the whole hype around 5G touches the enterprise, but the enterprise, I think, has an understanding of 5G is a tool, and that tool can be used in certain ways. But they know that they could use other tools, right? So they kind of understand, okay, this is promising, but has to be into a context. In terms of some unrealistic expectation, some of the vendors, they are very bullish about this market, but that's fair enough. Some are very bullish about the number of clients that they could get in a year. And if you followed a little bit, some of the numbers are out there, and you can have a look at the numbers that Nokia is pushing forward quarter on quarter, roughly 30 to 40 new customers. That is sort of a very well executed strategy at this point in time. So that's the number to beat. If someone comes back to me, a new entrant, and wants to have 50 or 60 new customer per quarter, well, that is, hopefully they're going to achieve that, but I'm very
Yeah.
skeptical. And again, I don't think this is really happening, but they
Yeah.
may prove me wrong.
Outside of a couple of really large companies, though, I think the volume game doesn't seem like doesn't seem like a fair indicator of how successful a company is being in this space, because the nature of what you're building for an enterprise or for a group of companies in a vertical is it's a very long-term project, and it's multiple components and connectivity and devices and all kinds of things and all kinds of services layered on top of that. So you might have a handful of customers, but they might be really, I guess, profitable customers over a long period of time. So you still could be very successful in this market, even if you weren't running up the numbers. Which leads me to a question: where have service providers been having the most success so far? We've talked about a lot of trials and a lot of partnerships, but are there actual places we can point to in the market where we're saying, yes, they built this private wireless network or private 5G network, and it looks like a case study for success?
A couple of points here. First of all, yeah, there are plenty of deployments. If you're looking at some of the service provider, that they partner with vendors, and they deployed networks and they're up and running, and it's all good. Something I wanted to touch though before, you correctly mentioned this could be very long-term engagement, and that is sort of one of the opportunity. You're supporting enterprise on the long term. At the same time, is also one of the challenge, because putting the resources to support someone in the long term, it means that it's not scalable. You cannot easily replicate, because you have to put those resources, that attention, to support the enterprise client, which is the opportunity at the end of the day. Now, rather than specific deployments, there are plenty of deployments around the world. I would recommend our audience to have a look at the private LTE and 5G networks tracker that we produce here at Omdia, that highlights a lot of these different deployments, a lot of the trials, and all different announcements for private networks. But rather than that, something that I think was significant is that we are seeing service providers starting to have more unique strategies. So starting to look a little bit beyond the obvious alliance with the big network vendors. Something that is I thought it was particularly interesting was Verizon partnering with Celona. So you have, one of the largest service provider globally partnering with a startup, and that could really be an interesting development for the market, because Soluna provides a very specific offering that could be used to target the small and medium enterprise segment. And I'm really curious to see if this partnership will enable Verizon to sort of accelerate in this market. And I think we will need to wait a few quarters to see whether there is, the right results, and whether the execution from these two companies is right.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to watch for sure. I do like the idea of them partnering with startups, because that, again, back to the specialization. Most startups have a very specific idea of what they're especially at first, what they're good at and what market they want to chase, because they really, more than anybody, need early success to show their investors that it's worth continuing to invest and expand and scale and so on. So you would say that they're not going to be one of those to take on the whole world, but just maybe a specific subset of companies that they feel like they can have quick, relatively quick results in. Kelsey, any follow ups there? I was starting to ask a question and then I just started rambling. So,
are there specific use cases or verticals that are doing particularly well with private networks right now, like IoT or manufacturing, or any thoughts on that?
So there are some verticals that are doing better than others. I would say I wouldn't say manufacturing. That's probably a lot of people are gonna hate me for this, but there it is. Manufacturing is the holy grail of private networks. Everyone sees that huge opportunity, and everyone wants to be part of the opportunity. Now, it's a little bit of a dream, if you want, or something that is not going to happen at the moment. So when you look at a lot of the deployments in the manufacturing space, you see that most of them, not all, of course, but most of them are quite limited in size and in scope. So you can call them glorified proof of concept if you want, and this is just because it takes some time, to convince the whole ecosystem that this is the right technology, is bringing the right results, so on and so forth. But that effectively means that it will take some time, and there are multiple challenges. Rather than manufacturing, I think mining is still one, arguably the most advanced vertical, and it has fairly large deployments. And to be fair, when we're looking at the mining space, it has probably a 10-year advantage over manufacturing in terms of the first deployments. So it means roughly 10 years of learnings, both from the enterprise side and from the vendor CSPs or partner, to understand, okay, is this working? What else do we need to do? How can we integrate with the different systems? What are the challenges that these enterprises really need to get addressed with the private networks? So I was saying, when we want to look at some larger deployments, some more interesting deployments, definitely look at mining rather than manufacturing.
Is mining, just my characterization of the vertical itself is it's more connectivity oriented than versus manufacturing almost needs like multiple dimensions of, it needs everything from cloud computing to edge computing to really fast connectivity, robotics, IoT. There's like all these layers and layers. Mining to me seems like it's the seems like there's more of a premium on just the connectivity space in general.
I would disagree a little bit. I think that the big difference probably with mining is that if we really, go at the bottom of the issue, mining, you have very clear safety KPIs
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that you can deliver upon, right? And I'm not saying that manufacturer doesn't have them, but with mining it is absolutely clear.
Right.
Extremely dangerous zones. So if you drive automation at any part of the mine, it does help with that. Manufacturing can have something similar, but probably is not so obvious or not so clear as with mining. So I think that that's sort of something that helps accelerating the market a little bit. But you're correct. One of the reasons why private networks is a complex and lengthy market is because it's not just about deploying the network. There are a lot of other components that you need to bring into that solution. And you may have some expertise in some of them, but you need to have partners for others. And overall, at the end of the day, you need to deliver a solution that addresses a specific problem that the enterprise has. So if your idea is just I'm delivering 5G because 5G is better, this is not really going to work for the
Right.
enterprise. If you say I'm going to use a private 5G network alongside X, Y, and Z, and in that way I'm going to address that specific KPI that the enterprise has, that will work. But of course, it's a different type of engagement, and it does require
Yeah, I
time.
think that's really interesting that you mentioned, the more consistent safety measures with mining, because it does seem like in the long run, maybe success with private networks would be being able to replicate it to some degree across, different companies with some specialization, but having some standards in place probably helps a lot from the get go. I think.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of companies are working to try to find that balance between how much can it be sort of off the shelf and how much do I need to custom work on top. And at this point in time, there is still a lot of custom work that needs to be done on top, and definitely is going to be like this for the next few years. And that's why while I see a lot of competition coming into private networks, then a lot of the expectation is that this market will be quick and easy, but it won't be. So either you accept that it's gonna be, difficult for you, or you unfortunately are gonna have some unpleasant memories from private networks.
Yeah, it might be a lot of money thrown down the mine, so to speak.
Good one.
So, Pablo, we're expecting to see you in about a week, the 17th and 18th in Austin, Texas. There will be a industry event called the Big 5G event. Our parent company that owns both Omdia and Light Reading owns this event, the Big 5G event. Will you be there, and what types of issues will you be talking about if you are there? As it relates to private networks, where I guess is the conversation going next?
First of all, I'm very excited. I will be attending the event, and it's the first trip back to the US in a long time. So quite excited to be there. And we are gonna have a whole afternoon talking about private networks. So we're gonna dissect the topic. We're gonna discuss business model strategies, the relationship between private networks and edge. So there is going to be a lot of conversation for everyone who's interested in this market.
Excellent. Yeah. So if you've listened to this and you're not as familiar with the private networks market, it might be good for you to get to that event somehow, and you kind of can get a much bigger picture of what's happening, because, like Pablo says, it's an incredibly dynamic space. It's an interesting space because there's all kinds of competitors, both on the enterprise and industry side and on the telco side, and all sides seem to be equally convinced that that there is some long-term opportunity here, but because it's a long-term opportunity, no one's really right or wrong just yet. It's still sort of it's still sort of shaping up. So we'll kind of see how things how things progress, and I think it'll be interesting to hear what the folks in the various verticals have to say about this, especially the ones that have maybe been trying this on their own in the past, in terms of unique networking situations, and now they're turning to the service providers and their partners and saying, maybe you guys can fix this for us. And I think we'll leave it there for now. Pablo Tomasi, thanks so much for joining us here on the Light Reading Podcast, and we will see you soon in Austin.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to catch up with you guys next week.
Thanks, Pablo.
All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.